Good evening, everybody. I'm Scott Lipkowitz, the Digital Services and Technology Librarian at Onondaga Free Library, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Strathmore Speaker Series to our March 22 event, the third event of our 2022 spring season. The Onondaga Free Library would like to thank the Strathmore Speaker Series for allowing us to partner with them in their endeavor to provide you, our patrons, with this informative and insightful programming. The Strathmore Speaker Series is made possible through the support of the City of Syracuse, the Gifford Foundation, the Greater Strathmore Neighborhood Association, and donations from people like you. We generally provide our speakers with an honorarium, so if you'd like to support this, please go to our website at strathmorespeakers.com and push the donate button on the landing page. Even a little bit of support is greatly appreciated. Our guest speaker tonight is conservationist and Cornell Lab of Ornithology project assistant, Holly Grant. Holly grew up in the Catskill Mountains, where she was inspired by nature from a very young age. She earned a degree in conservation biology from SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and later worked with endangered Karner Blue butterflies and American woodcock and golden-winged warblers. She's now a project assistant for Project FeederWatch and NestWatch at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Tonight, Holly will be speaking about ways to make your backyard more wildlife friendly with feeders and nest boxes, offer tips for a successful bird ID using the Merlin Bird ID app, and we'll discuss ongoing citizen science projects at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. A brief question and answer session will follow the presentation, so please be sure to stick around for that. And now, please welcome Holly Grant.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen so you can see the presentation I've created for y'all today. Let's see. Oh, come on now.
Yep. Looks good.
Working all right, Scott?
Yep, looks great.
All right, perfect. Okay, so just like Scott said, I'm going to be speaking to you today about making your yard more wildlife friendly. And as he said as well, I work at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and I actually only work for NestWatch now. Just a couple of weeks ago, we kind of switched it over, so I've just got the one job responsibility now. So definitely a calmer plate for me. All right, so I'm going to go over our agenda really quickly. So I'm going to talk about the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So if anybody's unfamiliar, I'll just go over a few quick points. We'll talk about what makes a yard wildlife friendly. We'll talk about attracting birds with feeders, attracting birds with nest boxes. And at the end, I'll just share a couple of tips for general birding. All right, so if you're not familiar, the Cornell Lab is a nonprofit institution that's part of Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. Our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. We have a visitor center as part of our main building and miles of hiking trails on the surrounding property. The lab is small and large at the same time. So we have over 200 employees, but a lot of groups and projects are made up of small teams. So for example, I work for NestWatch, and that is headed by our project leader, and I'm the project assistant, and that's our team. Our visitor center is a great place to spend some time. We're open most days, and the trails outside are accessible at any time. Our property is a bird sanctuary, so we ask that visitors who visit, they leave their pets and bicycles at home to stay on their marked trails, respect wildlife, and leave no trace. So I've brought up this nice little trail map that we share with folks. Basically, the orangish building here in the middle is our building that houses all of our employees. And then all of these trails here are available for folks to explore and go birding. It's a really, really peaceful area and a great place to work. All right, so we talked about the Cornell Lab and how it's a bird sanctuary, but how can you make your own backyard a bit of a bird sanctuary? If you'd like to attract birds, there's several things you can do to make your backyard attractive to them. So first, safe windows. So I imagine many people have experienced birds hitting their windows. It's pretty sad. Birds often mistake those reflections in the glass for open flying space. The screens that you might have on the outside, the insect screens, usually help break the reflection in that glass. But if you have windows without screens, such as glass doors or decorative windows, consider adding materials that break up that reflection on the outside. So netting or special stickers. I'm sure you've seen the hawk stickers and other reflective things that you can stick on the outside of your window. So those are great options. Another thing that can help is reducing your lawn. So carefully manicured lawns often consist of just a handful of grass species. So consider going a little bit longer between mowing so that grass can get a little bit higher, and perhaps let some of those sections grow wild or expand your garden. The more diversity in plant species that you have, the bigger the diversity of insects, birds, and other organisms. So looking at this a different way, consider that some birds and insects prefer certain plants as foods or as materials for nesting. The more options you have, the more likely you are to attract a variety of species. Another thing that can help here is to try not to rake leaves up in the fall. Leaf litter helps provide habitat for a variety of animals, including prey for birds like wrens, sparrows, and towhees. I'm sure you've heard this before, but something else that can be a really great benefit to birds is to use native plants, trees, and shrubs in your garden. So native species, as opposed to non-natives, have been in the region for millennia, co-evolving with our native birds. So you may find that birds are more likely to come to your crabapple, serviceberry, or mulberry trees rather than a berry-producing shrub that is native to another continent. And that's probably because the birds just have more experience with those native species, and it's possible that the non-natives might not have the same nutritional benefits that the birds need to flourish. Native plants also foster healthy native insect populations, and insects are a critical food source for birds, especially during the breeding season. I think it's something, I don't know what the percentage is, but there's a very, very high percentage of birds that feed their young almost exclusively insects while they spend time in the nest. And it may go without saying this last one, but a wildlife-friendly yard is not treated with any kind of chemical that has the intent to harm organisms. So that means pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides. And even though they might not be directly targeting birds, they target the insects, arthropods, plants that go to seed, and other natural food sources or nesting materials that birds take advantage of. It's hard to say how those chemicals may indirectly affect birds. And many people are probably aware of the story of bald eagles and DDT pesticides from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So in short, pesticide runoff flowed from crops into nearby streams where it accumulated in fish. The DDT pesticide then accumulated in eagles and other raptors that ate those fish. As a result, eagles themselves didn't die outright, but when it came to reproduce, they laid eggs with very thin, weak shells. And those shells broke easily and led to a widespread population crash. Good thing, bald eagles are doing much better today. All right, so the last page showed some strategies that are overall good practices for a wildlife-friendly yard. But these three options here are especially helpful if you're looking to attract birds specifically. So perhaps obviously bird feeders are one of the best ways to attract birds. I'll go into more details about this in a minute, but feeding birds encompasses basically the act of filling feeders with seeds, suet, or even putting fruit, jelly, or sugar water out in an area that's easily accessible by birds. Bird baths can also attract birds just as well as food. We often recommend using a dripper or a sprayer to help entice the birds to your little bird bath. You can make a homemade version of a dripper by poking a small hole in a bucket, filling it, and hanging it above your water basin. The water will drip slowly out of the bucket and will act as an attractant to nearby birds. They'll see that movement. And nest boxes are also known as birdhouses. So we're all pretty familiar with those little houses you can buy for your birds. These can provide extra nesting space for bird species that naturally nest in cavities, and can be especially helpful if there is a lack of natural cavities in and around your yard. So if your yard is mostly wide open space and you don't have a lot of trees, a nest box can definitely help provide extra nesting space compared to that open yard that doesn't have as many branches or cavities or other little sheltered areas where a bird could build a nest and raise its young. All right, so attracting birds to your backyard with feeders. Bird feeding is a very popular pastime for folks in the United States. There's only over 59 million of us. There's a lot of articles out there right now that talk about the merits of bird feeding. Some people say, yes, it's okay. Some people say, no, wait a second. But there's no evidence that we're aware of that suggests feeding birds is harmful, with the caveat that those feeders that you're providing are also cleaned regularly. As many of you are probably aware, birds can pass diseases to one another, especially at high contact points, such as bird feeders. We generally recommend cleaning feeders about 1 to 2 times per month, making sure to remove all the debris, all that little nasty gunk that you find, scrubbing it clean, and then soaking in a weak bleach or vinegar solution to help kill any microbes. Then you want to rinse the bleach or vinegar off and let it dry completely before you fill it with new seed. If feeders were harmful, we'd probably expect to see feeder bird species populations to be doing poorly compared to others. But despite the overall declines that birds are experiencing across the world, feeder bird species are in fact doing better than non-feeder bird species. So there's clearly some benefit. And just to be a bit of a myth buster here, feeders do not prevent birds from migrating, nor do birds become dependent on your feeders. Migration is triggered by day length and other hormonal cues, and it's important to remember that birds use feeders as a supplement to their natural diets. They do not depend on feeders for survival. Birds do tend to go for easy food sources to give them the best nutrition, and so when there is an abundant natural food, they tend to take advantage of those food sources while they're available. That's why you might not see many birds at your feeders in the fall, because that's when a lot of plants go to seed or have berries available. When natural food sources are scarce or are covered up by snow, you'll likely see more birds taking advantage of the easy pickings at your feeders. If you do decide to provide food for birds, here are a few tips to keep in mind. If you've just put out new feeders or switched up the kind of food you offer, don't be worried if you don't see birds visiting just yet. Sometimes it can take a few weeks for those birds to find the feeders, or even just to get used to those new food types. Different species tend to have different food preferences too. So if you've always provided, let's say, thistle seed, but you're now putting out suet, you can expect to see a different species visiting than you're used to. If you'd like to encourage many different species, then offering a variety of food types and feeder types is the best way to go. Variety encourages diversity. So there's some birds, for example, that would visit a tube feeder, but wouldn't visit a platform feeder, or ones that like to eat food or seed that's been scattered on the ground, but they might not come up to feeders that are hanging. If there's a lot of open space between your feeders and the nearest trees or shrubs, adding brush piles can give birds more confidence to cross that expanse without the fear of predators. Brush piles can be made of gathered branches, plant stalks, or other similar materials, and they give birds a protected place to hide or to rest. I recommend placing the brush piles close to your feeders, but not so close that predators like feral cats or raccoons could surprise the birds feeding on the ground beneath your feeders. So something like, 5 to 10 feet away is probably okay. And speaking of predators, if your feeders are hung on a pole, you might be interested in adding a cone or a stovepipe baffle, which are designed to help prevent climbing mammals such as raccoons, squirrels, and chipmunks from accessing your birdseed. There's no 100% guaranteed way to prevent squirrels from accessing your feeders, but this can be a really great place to start. So in the picture here, I've got a cone baffle, and you can usually buy them at your local store that sells the birdseed and feeders and that kind of thing. They've usually got some sort of cone baffle that you can buy for their pole. I'll reiterate that native plants can be a great substitute for feeders as well. So if you live somewhere where feeders are not allowed, consider starting a garden or planting a few plants like sunflowers, coneflowers, or trumpet vine, which provide seeds or nectar for the birds in your yard. And lastly, I just want to make a really quick plug for Project FeederWatch, which is one of the several citizen science programs that the Cornell Lab runs. As we mentioned earlier, I worked for them for the last 4 years. Participants in FeederWatch watch their feeders and count birds according to our protocol. It's super easy. You just record those counts on our website, and then the data gets added to a large database of people all over the US and Canada. and it's openly accessible to scientists for use in their research. So I think last year we had close to 30,000 participants across the US and Canada, all watching their feeders, submitting their counts, and all of that data gets added to our database, which has, I think, 35 years now worth of data. The season runs from November through April, and if you want more information, you can go to feederwatch.org. And one of the many great things about FeederWatch is all of the free resources that they have on their website. So you don't even need to sign up for FeederWatch to check out these resources. I'm going to draw your attention to just one of them. It's called the Common Feeder Birds tool. And this tool allows you to use filters. So you can filter for your region, you can filter for the feeder types that you have and the food types that you're offering, and it will tell you what kind of species you're likely to see. And alternatively, you can click on a bird's photo to see its preferences and then use that information to tailor your feeder offerings to encourage that species to visit. So you could use common feeder birds to say, okay, you know what, I want to see cardinals, click on the cardinal picture and you figure out, okay, they like safflower, they like sunflower seeds, they come to platform feeders. All right, I'm going to put some sunflower seeds in a platform feeder and hopefully I'll see some cardinals. If we have time at the end, maybe I'll be able to show you guys that on our website. I can kind of do a little demonstration. All right, and as I mentioned previously, nest boxes are just another option for attracting birds to your yard. Nest boxes are meant to mimic natural cavities, and so they only attract birds that nest in tree cavities or other small crevices. And that means you won't find a cardinal, a hummingbird, nor a goldfinch using a nest box because they build their nests in open cups on tree branches or in shrubs. You know, they're a lot more out in the open. They don't hide them inside trees. So the other citizen science project that I work for is NestWatch. Again, it's where participants monitor bird nests. They record what they see in the nest and report it to us at nestwatch.org. Like FeederWatch, NestWatch data are added to a large database accessible by scientists. It's important to note that birds and their nests are federally protected. So NestWatch participants are asked to review and follow our code of conduct, which is a simple set of guidelines we have that are designed to reduce disturbance of the nesting birds while still allowing for accurate record keeping. In short, we recommend checking on a nest only 1 to 2 times per week, keeping those visits short, not touching the birds or the nest, and giving it a lot of space otherwise. A typical nest check lasts less than a minute and should be enough to get a quick count of the eggs or the young before you move on. Because birds must stay in one place to build their nest, incubate eggs, and raise young, they're typically more susceptible to predators during this time. Because of this, we suggest leaving the nest via a different path than the one you took to the nest. So if you found a nest, you want to make it look like your path walks by the nest and you're kind of looking over on your side to see what's in the nest, rather than leaving a dead end trail that ends right there at the nest box, because that's going to lead predators right to it. We also recommend adding predator guards to those nest box poles, and these are just the same as that cone and stovepipe baffle that I was talking about for your feeder pole. They help prevent snakes, raccoons, chipmunks, and more from accessing the nest and preying on those nestlings and eggs. And I can say here too that we actually used some NestWatch data to show that boxes with predator guards had success rates of 6.7% higher, which doesn't look like a lot, but when you look at the data, it's a big amount. So predator guards are definitely helpful. Birds can benefit from all of this extra nesting space that those nest boxes provide, especially in human-modified habitats such as backyards and landscaped areas. As I've mentioned before, only cavity nesting bird species will be attracted to nest boxes, and of all cavity nesting species, there are a small number that can be reliably attracted to a man-made box. Common species that use nest boxes are bluebirds, chickadees, tree swallows, wrens, some owls will use nest boxes, and wood ducks. Just because you place a nest box near your yard, however, it doesn't necessarily guarantee a bird will use it. It's important to place the box in the right habitat. For example, chickadees prefer nest boxes in forested areas. Bluebirds like open meadows, and wrens tend to like those boxes that are placed in that shrubby habitat that's right between meadows and forests. And it's important to have the proper entrance hole size. You can exclude larger species from boxes based on the entrance hole size. So invasive species like house sparrows and European starlings, they compete for nesting space with our native birds. And having the proper entrance hole size for your target bird can help deter those invasive species from taking over that nesting space. So in some cases, chickadees and wrens are pretty small. So if you keep that entrance hole small so they can fit inside, but the European starlings can't, that can reduce that competition. On the NestWatch website, we have a great resource called Right Bird, Right House. This tool allows you to filter for your region and local habitat, and it will provide a list of cavity nesting species that are most likely to nest near you, and which will also be attracted to man-made nest boxes. Then you can click on the species to learn its preferences, get a downloadable construction plan to build nest structures, and to learn box placement tips for when you're all done building it. Note that some of those species in that tool aren't necessarily cavity nesters, but they can still be attracted to man-made nest structures. So this would be something like an osprey, right? So they don't nest inside trees, but if you build a nesting platform for ospreys, it's a pretty good chance you can attract some. You can also use this tool to just help you decide what nest box to buy if you're wanting to buy a nest box on the internet or in a store. You can download those plans, kind of see what the preferences are, and then use that as a guide. All right, this is a little bit of a crazy slide, but another resource that we have on NestWatch is called Features of a Good Birdhouse, and it shows general information regarding how to make a nest box the best it can be for your birds. So we've got some examples shown here. A good nest box, like the one on the left, mimics a natural cavity. So that's the main goal, is to make it as similar to a natural cavity as you can. It's made with untreated, unpainted wood. It doesn't have a perch, has proper ventilation and drainage, and has a door of some kind so that you can clean it out at the end of the year. The example boxes on the right are a little less ideal. It's not necessarily that a bird won't nest there, but it can make it, they're not as safe for the birds. So they might be better suited as decorative pieces rather than functional birdhouses. Bright colors, like the one in the middle there, can make boxes more noticeable by predators and vandals. Perches can allow predators to more easily access the contents of the box. So imagine there are some crows and jays that prey on nestlings, and if they have a little perch there that they can use as leverage to reach inside the box to nab those young, we definitely don't want that. And the boxes need to be big enough, not only so that the adult can fit inside, but also so that all of the young can have enough space too. So this little decorative box here on the bottom right, I think somebody had mentioned, oh, this is great for a hummingbird. Well, one, hummingbirds don't nest in cavities, and two, it's just such a small box. There's not going to be enough room for eggs or nestlings once they grow. So to show you what I mean, here's a nice little progression. You've got these are 3 different chickadee nests, but you can see that there's 9 eggs on the left. That's a typical clutch size for chickadees. They always lay a lot of eggs. In the middle here, you've got all the nestlings. They're taking up a little bit more space because they're growing. And on the right here, there's only 6 fledgling or nestlings that are about ready to fledge here. So imagine if all 9 of them were in there. I mean, there wouldn't be barely any room left in that box. All right, so next year, I want to just dip our toes a little bit into some of the common questions and concerns that I hear during the breeding season from our participants, and just to prepare you in case you run into similar problems in the future. So one of the most popular ones, what do you do if you find a baby bird? Maybe you've never seen a baby bird before, maybe you've got experience with this, but it looks like a lot of information, but it's pretty simple. The very first thing you need to do is determine whether or not the bird you found is a nestling or a fledgling. Nestlings usually have bare skin or sections of bare skin and often can't really move that much. They're kind of not necessarily helpless, but they're not too mobile. Fledglings, on the other hand, are fully feathered They may look a little bit rough around the edges. For example, they might have a very short or missing tail, and some have downy feathers still peeking out, sort of like that robin there on the left, but they can hop or fly short distances. If your bird is a fledgling, you don't need to do anything. The parents are nearby and likely waiting for you to go away so they can come back and tend to the bird. Birds, when they leave the nest, really can't fly that well, so they hop and they flutter around and they look kind of helpless, but it's just them stretching their muscles and getting stronger. So just make sure that if you find a fledgling, it's out of harm's way, and to make sure you keep your pets inside for a little bit as well. If there are predators or other dangers nearby, like maybe it's right next to a road, you might want to try to move the bird under cover of a nearby bush or a shrub. But don't force it. If the bird is hopping away from you, then either gently guide it to safety or just let it do its thing. Take cues from the adults too. If they're dive bombing you, you should probably back off. If the bird is a nestling though, try to find its nest, which should be nearby, and put it back in. If the nestling is injured, or if you know for a fact that the adults are dead, then your best course of action is to call a wildlife rehabilitator. Be sure to call them first, though, before you take any action so that they can give you the best instructions on how to proceed. And don't try to feed or water the baby bird. This is against federal laws, and it will also likely do more harm than good because birds have really specific nutritional needs at that point in their life. So it's better to just call that rehabilitator, let them dictate how to proceed. Another common question that we get in the spring generally has to do with a nest that someone found in their grill, on their trailer hitch, or somewhere else on their property that's inconvenient. If all you find is nesting material, meaning that there are no eggs or young present, sometimes they can be hidden in there, so you just got to be sure, then you can just remove that the nesting material. Keep an eye on the area for the next few days because birds can be pretty determined to rebuild. However, federal laws protect bird nests when they're active. So once the eggs are laid or you see young in the nest, then it's protected. And the best course of action is just to let them be. Most birds can complete their nesting cycle from laying eggs to fledging young in about a month or so. So it should only be a couple of weeks until you're able to remove that nest. Your first thought might be to move the nest to a nearby area, maybe just shift it over a couple of feet. But birds often don't recognize their own nest, even if it's just a couple of feet away from its original position. All they see is that their nest is not where they left it, and there's a strong potential for them to then abandon that nest and move on to start over elsewhere. And I've definitely heard of some birds that have refound their nest. It's, not very common, and it's a low probability, so it's better to just not move the nest at all. All right, I'm going to bust a couple of myths here. So these bullets here are truths regarding some common misconceptions that I've heard over the years. So first, many folks think that baby birds are baby-sized, and this is totally understandable, certainly true while they're in the nest. When they first hatch out of those eggs, they are little tiny, cute things. But birds grow really fast in those couple of weeks that follow, and by the time they're ready to leave the nest, they're about adult-sized, and sometimes they're even heavier than the adults because the adults are exhausting themselves, keeping up with that incredible growth rate. So the babies are getting all the food and the parents are just exhausting themselves. So yeah, if you see a baby leave the nest, it's going to be probably adult-sized. I've also had some folks refer to birds as pregnant or otherwise assume that birds have a belly full of eggs that they all lay at once. And I get it, that's totally understandable. The truth is that most songbirds create and lay one egg per day, and it takes only about 18 hours for that egg to form, sometimes longer or shorter depending on what species you're talking about. But basically, as the egg cell passes through the bird's oviduct, the yolk and the albumen are formed, and then the shell is formed around them, and eventually the egg is laid in the nest. Then the process starts all over again until the entire clutch is laid. So that chickadee nest we checked out before that had 9 eggs in it, that took about 9 days for all of the eggs to be laid, and then that bird will start incubating. Next, birds do not use their nests all year round. Staying in one place, like we said before, is extremely risky, especially because they draw attention to themselves every time they leave the nest. When you're feeding your nestlings, every 20 minutes, that's a lot of movement around that nest. So they try to reduce the amount of time they spend in one spot to avoid the notice of predators. Remember, many birds migrate or move to other habitats to spend the winter too. That said, some birds will use cavities and nest boxes for shelter in harsh winter weather. But overall, nests are simply a place to raise young. And finally, it's unfortunately true that nest failure is really common for birds. It's one of the reasons why birds lay so many eggs and have multiple broods per season. That means they lay several clutches. I think bluebirds are common. They lay 2 to 3 clutches a year. A lot of birds lay 1 to 2. The birds are trying to give themselves as many chances as possible to pass on their genes, despite those inevitable losses they're going to experience. So it's sad to think about, but it is normal. All right, finally, I just want to wrap up here by going over a few tips for folks that are generally interested in birding. So for those wondering, the phrase birding usually refers to the activity of watching, observing, and or recording birds. Recording can be sound, photos, whatever you like. Some folks consider birding to be a more active form of bird watching, where bird watchers may watch birds passively for simple enjoyment. Birders are often looking to record which species and how many birds they see. They might make special trips to find certain birds, and they might even participate in scientific endeavors like breeding bird atlases. But overall, it's a pretty general term for someone who's interested in observing wild birds. If you've been watching birds for a long time, regardless of what kind of birder you are, you might have a life list, a record of all the bird species you've ever seen. These lists are often informal, and the rules for which species are included vary between individuals. Some people will only count a bird if they've seen it and they've heard it. Some people don't even keep a paper list. They just kind of have this mental list of the birds they've heard. It's all personal. Some people go a step farther and keep track of how many species they see per year or per state. There are even people out there that make it a mission to find as many species as possible in a certain time frame. A man from the Netherlands currently holds the world record for the number of bird species seen in 1 year, with 6,852 species, all in 365 days. Keep in mind, there are about 10,000 species worldwide, so that's about 2/3 of all species on Earth that we know of. So this brings me to eBird, which is yet another project by the Cornell Lab, and it's a really powerful tool for birders. eBird allows you to record the species you see. It keeps track of where and when you reported your birds, so it can generate your life list according to all sorts of metrics, and it allows you to attach sound and photos to your reports. eBird is available online at ebird.org, and there's a mobile app available as well. And on that note, the other projects, FeederWatch and NestWatch, they also have their own data entry apps. Everything is for free as a free download. One other great thing about eBird is the resources they provide. Millions of people all over the world participate. And so you can use eBird tools to look up every reported sighting of a certain species. You can use their hotspot tool to view areas where most birds are reported, or you can even check out their science section to see population density and trends. I love using eBird to explore potential birding spots when I'm planning vacation or to look up where certain species have been seen lately. So just the other day, I was thinking, you know what? I haven't seen snow buntings yet this year. Where have they been reported lately? I found an area that was just north of Ithaca here. I drove up there and there I was, a big old flock of snow buntings. So it's pretty cool when you've really cool tool to help you find what you're looking for. So this is one of the pages in eBird. I just want to show a little screenshot of what that looks like. So here's all of the hotspots, like I was just mentioning, all the hotspots in the world based on what people have observed and reported to eBird. So this is a little bit of a function of population as well, and internet access. So keep in mind that those lighter areas of the map, they're not necessarily devoid of birds, but could just represent an area where there are no eBird participants. For example, you can see the Amazon rainforest there in South America has a huge diversity of birds. We know that. But on the map, it shows a lot of light areas. But that's probably because most of the area is dense jungle and inaccessible to a lot of people with eBird. Here's another picture from eBird. Here, I've used the tools and the filters that eBird has to view all of the sightings of bald eagles in the Syracuse area in March this year. So we're only, I think, 10 days in, and this is how many bald eagles have been spotted so far in March. The red markers indicate recent sightings within about the last week or so. So if I wanted to try and find a bald eagle, I could zoom into one of those red markers to see where the eagles were seen and try to find one myself. Just note, I just want to let you all know that eBird will hide the recent reports of sensitive species to help reduce unnecessary disturbance. So this isn't necessarily going to work if you're trying to find certain owl species or endangered species. So eBird will hide that for a little bit of time just to prevent those birds from getting too disturbed. All right. And if eBird sounds like it's a little bit too much for you right now, that's totally okay. We have another free app called Merlin. Merlin is basically a bird identification app. Just answer 5 simple questions about your mystery bird. It's asks you where you are, what the date is, how big is the bird, what colors did you see, and what was it doing? So was it sitting on a perch? Was it foraging on the ground? Was it flying? And then you answer those questions and it'll give you a whole long list of all the possible species that you could be looking at. There's also a photo ID tool where you can upload a photo for the app to identify, and new last year, sound ID. So that means you can record audio with your phone and Merlin will tell you who's singing in real time. So Merlin and eBird are linked, and Merlin will also keep a simple like list for you. So this is a really, really cool app. I use it, you know, I can already identify a lot of birds in North America, but I still keep it on hand because it's like this little mini field guide that you can have on your phone. And like I said, it's just so powerful. And I think the 5 question part of the ID and photo ID are something around 90% or more accurate. Sound ID is new, so they're still working on getting that available for more species. So I highly recommend Merlin for anyone who wants to get better at identifying birds or just wants to have a quick reference guide when they're out in the field. Merlin team, like I said, is still working on filling in a few gaps, but Merlin does work in most areas of the world and can help you identify over 7,500 species. So remember before we said there's 10,000 total in the world. So this is about 3/4 of all species. And just to let you know, you're not going to download 7,500 species all on the app. You have to download certain bird packs for your location. So I have the bird pack for North America. You could download one for just the Northeast or wherever you like. The sound ID feature specifically does have some limitations. For example, it currently works for just the US and Canada, and it can't identify all 750 North American birds, but the goal is definitely to expand that. Regardless, I definitely recommend you try that sound ID because it's pretty cool to stand out in the woods, hit the record button, and have Merlin just tell you what you're hearing. All right, so that is everything I have for you. And I'll take questions now, and if we have time at the end, I can show you how those websites work as well.
All right, so if you have any questions, you can place them into the chat and I will read them out for everybody. One question, so the guy from the Netherlands who saw 6,000 plus in a year, if you were to spend a year just in New York, how many bird species, and if you were to see them all, how many bird species could you possibly add to your?
I don't know the exact number, but it's somewhere between 300 and 400.
Okay, that's not.
So if you were just in New York State, like I said, there's 750 in North America, so about that much. So, excuse me. So yeah, there's it wouldn't probably be easy, I'll tell you that, but definitely spend some time down by the city and on Long Island. There's a lot of vagrants that stop by there. By water bodies is my advice.
Cool, excellent. Yeah, I don't think many of us are going to have the time to trek all over the world to see 6,000 species in a year.
Right. I know. I mean, there's a book out there by Noah Stryker, and I've read it, and he held the previous record, It was over 6,000 species. And it's fascinating to see, every single moment of every day, going out. And he's like, in his book, he was like, wow, I'm just really glad that I didn't get sick more than I did, because you lose a day, you lose potentially 100 species. So it's a lot.
Interesting. Okay, so we have a few questions. So the first question is from Peter Thompson. And I guess in his experience, he had a squirrel actually widen the opening in a new birdhouse to convert it into a squirrel motel. Is there any way to prevent that aside from the stovepipe that you were showing?
Yeah, so actually you can get, I'm not sure where these are sold, but you can take a piece of sheet metal and cut the entrance hole in the middle and affix that over your entrance hole. That's pretty hard for squirrels to bite through. But there's also options out there, something called a knoll guard. It's basically like this metal cage that you can fit over your entrance hole. That's another option as well. You can make that just out of, like I said, chicken wire or mesh, metal mesh.
Cool. So the next question is from Mary Harcola. And she asks, once you've downloaded a bird pack in the Merlin Bird ID, can you remove it, or are you committing to that one pack?
You can definitely uninstall it. Yep. So I have downloaded, North America, and if I'm gonna be going on vacation somewhere, let's say I'm trying to go to Iceland for my honeymoon, so
Nice.
I download the Iceland one. I look at all those, and then I can uninstall it when I get home.
Cool. So the next question is from Sally Sakshog, and apologies, Sally, if I've butchered your name, I apologize. Do you need to be near Wi-Fi for Merlin? Will it work if you're offline out in the woods somewhere?
Yeah, it should work without Wi-Fi. So I've used it on all of my birding travels. I've never had an issue connecting to the database. So it's basically kind of all within the app. And then if you want to sync it up to an online account, you need to be attached to Wi-Fi for that. But just to use it in general out in the field, you don't need Wi-Fi.
Cool. And then the next question is from Sandra Sopchak, and she says that they use Song Sleuth. And have you ever heard of that?
It sounds familiar, but I don't think, if I did ever use it, it was several years ago. But if it's it sounds like it's probably similar to Sound ID. I know that Merlin, the AI that kind of taught Merlin how to ID all these things, are based on submissions to eBird. So this is, all of those reports that people are sending all over the world to eBird are being used to train Merlin to identify all this. That makes sense.
Okay, the next question is from Lori DiPaolo, and she asks, what do you recommend to deter starlings and grackles? And can I add an extra question onto that? Because we get grackles here at my house, and I don't know if everyone else there has the same experience, but grackles seem really angry all the time. And is that true? Are they very angry all the time?
So this is kind of a hot topic, right? So blackbirds are something that people are really, some people love them, some people hate them. And grackles, red-winged blackbirds, all those blackbirds you see in the spring, they're native species. And so we like to see them around. I know there's a lot of them. Maybe you get a lot of them at your feeders. The starlings are non-native, so I can totally understand why you really wouldn't want them around. But a lot of times they're mixed flocks, so you can't really pick and choose. My suggestion would be, if they're eating a lot of your food, maybe try to put out less food, maybe put out just a cup of food instead of filling the entire feeder. That way, when they eat it, you're not, feeding these hordes of birds and they kind of are like, all right, there's not enough bird food here. It's not a reliable source. We're just going to head out somewhere else. You can also take your feeders down for about a week. That'll encourage them to kind of move on and find food elsewhere. The sad thing is, and I shouldn't say sad, but the kind of frustrating thing is that blackbirds love all kinds of food. So in some cases, for example, house sparrows are another invasive species. You can sometimes discourage them by providing safflower, because they don't really like safflower seeds, but your cardinals do, and some of the other prettier species that you want to see do like safflower. But for starlings and blackbirds, yeah, they kind of like everything. So I think your best bet is either going to be to take your feeders down for a little bit, or try to embrace it.
Okay, our next question is from John Turpening, and apologies, John, if I've butchered your last name. And he asks, do songbirds transmit high pathogenic avian flu? I know there's currently an outbreak somewhere.
Yeah, so this is pretty new right now. I only just got an email about it today to kind of, get some background information. And I don't know a lot, so I'm not going to be able to answer this in full, but I think that's something that you're going to need to talk to probably the DEC or something about. From what I understand, it's not been seen in upstate New York yet. But yeah, just, keep an eye out for the news, keep an eye out for articles that come out, because like I said, it's kind of new and scientists are still trying to figure out exactly how to handle it there with bird feeders and, on the personal level.
Okay, another question from Sally Sackshog. And she asks, what about feeding during the summer? And I guess feeding just year round generally.
Yep. So if you remember in my slideshow there, so feeding birds is not going to keep them in one certain area, right? So if you want to feed them in the summertime, it's totally fine. You might not see as many at your feeders because they're busy tending to young. And like I said, young usually eat insects. But those adults still need to eat sometimes, so they might stop by and grab a quick snack at your feeders. One thing that I would probably keep in mind is if you provide suet, those suet blocks you can buy at bird feed stores, you want to keep an eye on those because they can go rancid if they're not specially processed. And sugar water as well. If you're putting that out for your hummingbirds, just make sure you're cleaning it out maybe once every 2 to 3 days. I know it sounds really frequent, but when mold and other things can get into that sugar water and make it harmful for the birds. So just keep an eye on things, make sure if it's getting hot out, you're changing things regularly. And like I said, you might want to clean your feeders a little bit more often in the summer, just because those warm temperatures can encourage microbial growth.
Cool. All right. While I wait for if there are any other questions, what is your favorite bird? That's probably not PC to ask, because you're supposed to like them all equally, but do you have a favorite species that you enjoy seeing every year?
Yes, so I have a handful of favorite birds, but one of my favorites is a hermit thrush. It's not one that probably many people see because it's found in the deep woods, but if you hear it, you'll probably be reminded of, walking in a trail in the deep woods. It's just something that I really look forward to in the springtime. So
cool.
One of my favorites.
Okay, our next question is from Lonnie Rossi. And Lonnie, apologies if I've butchered your name. How do I discourage woodpeckers from pecking on my house? And I guess they have 3 feeders, and the woodpeckers migrate from the feeders to the side of the house.
Yeah. So there's 3 reasons that a woodpecker will be pecking on the side of your house. One is looking to build a nest. That happens there. It's a wooden area, and they like to build their own cavities. 2, they're looking for food. So if they're in your house, that means you might have some insects in that wooden paneling. Or 3, they are knocking on the side of your house because they're doing some sort of courtship call or a territorial call. That's why they're hammering on your house. So if you're trying to discourage them, some things that you might want to try is to add mylar strips or something to kind of scare them away. These are not, 100% guaranteed to help, but it's definitely something that's worth trying. You can also try putting up a nest box nearby if they're actually, digging deep holes with the intent to nest. Try providing some other nesting space. If they're looking for food, that's kind of harder. I would probably either try to treat the problem in your siding, or, like I said, try to use some of those deterrents like mylar strips, netting, something that's going to try to be more of a barrier to letting them access that. So hopefully that's helpful.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, I guess if there are no other questions, let's say thank you, Holly, for joining us this evening. Thank you very much. That's fantastic and very informative. just wanted to mention really quickly that next Friday, the 18th, Onondaga Free Library is partnering with the State Parks Department, and we're going to be conducting a guided bird walk at the Green Lakes Birding Conservation Area. There's still some spots for that left, so if you'd like to sign up for that, it's going to be from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., weather permitting. If there will be a rain date, I think. I'm like 90% sure if we're rained out. But if you'd like to, you can go to oflibrary.org and go to our programs and our event calendar and sign up for that. And so again, that's going to be next Friday, May 18th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And I will be there, but I will not be leading it because I don't know anything about birds. One of the state parks personnel will be there who is actually an expert on birds, and they will be guiding us through the birding. I just want to thank Holly again for joining us this evening. And before we wrap up, I'm just going to tell everybody about what we've got coming up. Then our next event is going to be on Zoom again on Thursday, April 14th at 7 p.m. And it's going to featuring motivational speaker, coach, and Syracuse City School District physical education teacher and CEO of Find the Wisdom, Alfonso Whitehurst. And then in May, our final event of the spring 2022 season will take place on the 12th. And that's going to feature author and Syracuse native MC Antil, who will be speaking about his new book, Floor Burns, Love, Passion, and the 1967 Syracuse All-City Championship. And then after that, it'll be summer and we'll all be enjoying the warmth. So no one will be wanting to be cooped up indoors. And then we will be returning for our fall season in September. You can find any updates on the series at strathmorespeakers.com and also at oflibrary.org. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And hopefully we'll see you all again in April. And hopefully I'll see a few of you next Friday at Green Lakes. So thank you guys and have a great night.
Thank you.